Kia ora, I'm Chelsea Daniels, and this is The Front Page, a daily podcast presented by the New Zealand Herald. Kiwis are flying the coop, most of them heading for better opportunities across the Tasman. Latest Stats NZ figures show just over 124,000 migrant departures in the year to October, up nearly 7%, 71,000 of them New Zealanders. What is pushing our best and brightest out the door? And is the grass really greener on the other side? Today on The Front Page, NZ Herald Business Editor-at-Large Liam Dann is with us to dissect what draws Kiwis abroad and what it all means for the ones sticking around. First off, Liam, tell me about these latest Stats NZ figures.
Yeah, so we've just had the last lot of migration data that we'll get for the year, and that takes us up to the end of October. And they're still showing quite historically high levels of departures of Kiwis and other nationalities leaving long term and lower numbers arriving. But the monthly change does suggest that the worst of the brain drain is behind us. So we're seeing that net migration figure up slightly. So 11,300 was the net migration number, the sort of excess population gain through to the end of October. And that's, that's better than it was. We'd been down to around 9,000 and something at one point. But all of this is, historically very low, considering, in those big years post-COVID, we were seeing like migration gains above 100,000. I think we had 136 or something like that net migration at one point, which was a record boom, obviously. We've gone from boom to bust. But hopefully it's some signs there that that's starting to correct.
And so what's the pull for Kiwis overseas? Where are they heading?
Well, we don't immediately get up-to-date numbers around departures to Australia specifically, but we do know that like somewhere around half to 60% of all the migration out of New Zealand is towards Australia traditionally. So I would say Australia is where people are headed. We've seen numbers this year suggesting that higher levels of younger people are going to Australia, and the big push or pull in either direction for migration is very much the economy, very much the job market, the labour market. So, if job prospects and wages are significantly better in Australia, then you'll see that flow increase. I mean, historically, it's tended to look a bit better in Australia most of the time, but when that becomes exaggerated, and in New Zealand the job market has been really tough. They haven't had the kind of short, sharp economic shock that we've had in New Zealand. So they haven't, and then there's some reasons for that. Their interest rates and the way that the Reserve Bank has done things there has been to take a more, casual pace or a more relaxed attitude to inflation. We've hit it pretty hard in New Zealand, and obviously everybody knows we've had a pretty rough 2, maybe 3 years compared to Australia.
And when it comes to the numbers and the ages of people that are moving overseas as well, we've got that, 18 to 30-year-old bracket. That's generally your OE crowd, going to London or going to Australia for better opportunities, greener pastures. But what I've found this year especially, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that there are older people migrating overseas as well. And does that kind of give us a glimpse into how bad the job market is here?
Yeah, I think that very much is the job market stuff. So yeah, you're right. The younger people, well, you can say, they were cooped up. A lot of people were cooped up through COVID. There was a bounce after COVID. Younger Kiwis have always headed offshore to Australia, to the UK, and now increasingly if they can get the right visas for the US and Japan and Southeast Asia. So, I wouldn't be too worried about that. Hopefully they're going to come back. I'm in that boat. My daughter's off to Melbourne in February.
Flying the coop
to live. Yeah, but when older people who have established lives, maybe have own property and all that sort of stuff, that is a big effort to move countries. And I don't think you do that unless you're feeling like the opportunity is really lacking in your home country. I mean, that's what we see drive immigration arrivals from some countries into New Zealand. And unfortunately, I think that is been the case. There's, we've really, the sentiment in the New Zealand economy has been really bad for the past couple of years. We thought we were having the bad year in 2024 and we're all going to survive till 2025, and then really 2025 has sort of been a repeat of that. There are signs, and I always touch wood and everything, but there's a lot of confidence that we are moving into a real recovery now. However strong that turns out to be, because it's not expected to be a boom, but any improvement over what we've been through, if we start to see the labour market turn around in the next year ahead, then we will probably see those migration figures continue to improve into a net gain for New Zealand.
Right. So those migration figures really do go hand in hand with the unemployment figures, hey?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's job opportunity, and so in some ways it's not just the unemployment, it's the employment, which is job creation, and obviously wages. I mean, if you've got a high cost of living and inflation, then higher wages are going to be appealing. But when you look at Australia and New Zealand now, Australia's actually got higher inflation than New Zealand. They're up at 3.8% inflation. They haven't cut their interest rates the way we have here because of that. And so there are some cost of living issues, being debated pretty intensely in Australia. And so, as well as the hope that New Zealand's economy sort of improves in the next year, there is the possibility that life just isn't as easy or as great as it's cracked up to be in Australia, and the kind of economy that they're going to have in the next couple of years, especially once you move from, like I mentioned, my daughter, if you're going to Melbourne to live somewhere in the inner city in a flat and work in hospitality and all that cool stuff, that's quite fun. And you're very mobile. But when you're talking about moving the family and having to have a mortgage and really that full adult life, that's a different story, and you start to weigh the economic differential a lot more carefully at that point, I think.
Yeah, so the grass may seem greener on the other side, because I only know this because my parents ask me every time I'm on the phone with them what petrol prices are, and then they come back with me in shock and awe about how expensive it is in New Zealand. Dad always asks me what's the price per kilo for chicken, lamb chops, things like that.
We worry about the things like the supermarket prices and petrol and that sort of stuff. But I think if you are trying to buy a house in a sort of inner suburb of Sydney or Melbourne, that's where you're suddenly blown out of the water in terms of even with a better wage probably in a basic job. So there are some things. I mean, there are parts of Australia probably where it's still really appealing, but they are booming. So you've got Western Australia and Perth, Adelaide, obviously, and probably still the parts of Queensland where Kiwis are finding it really good. There's still the government still probably always has more money than New Zealand's government, so it's able to entice people with the kind of skills they need, like nurses and police and all that sort of stuff. So that's but that is a constant historical drag on New Zealand's younger population. So I doubt we're ever going to see it completely go away, but it's just at the kind of worrying levels we've seen in the past year, where it sort of felt like we're losing an outsized number of people, and that could have an impact on our skills and our labour market, in the coming year or two, as our market actually improves and businesses start looking for workers again. Will we have the skills in New Zealand? We could suddenly go from that sort of rising unemployment and a sort of a labour market that's really weak to being at capacity again, and that drives inflation.
In recessionary times, as we've seen in our past, people will make choices to go to places where they perceive there's more opportunity. And then that is the job of our government, is to create the conditions that they can see a future here.
Well, let's look at the latest numbers.
I think we can do that, but we've got some work to do.
When do you think this country will be good enough for them to return?
Well, we're doing everything you can't say a date, but what you can do is make sure everything you're doing every day is about doing the things that, I honestly believe, if we grow the economy, if we restore law and order, deliver world-class education, better healthcare, that is the reason for why people stay here.
So governments from Muldoon to Luxon have always quipped about raising the IQ of both countries when it comes to Kiwis going to Australia. But on this side of the Tasman, what kind of retention policies or super or tax tweaks or something do you think would actually stem this tide?
Yeah, I mean, look, the bottom line is it's getting wages up, and of course it's got to be getting wages up without just artificially inflating them. I mean, New Zealand's done some work around the minimum wage under the last Labor government, which probably makes the entry-level jobs more appealing here, but probably also has meant that there's been some sort of inflationary pressure. So these are the productivity challenges to make your economy more efficient and create wealth, progress towards a more wealthy economy in real terms. Both New Zealand and Australia actually have very similar issues with that right at the moment. So while the top level in Australia is sort of frothier and there's more money around, it's a bigger country, it's got bigger financial markets and all these things going for it, not to mention the huge amount of superannuation money and all that sort of stuff. Underlying it, their Treasury is saying the same things to their government that our Treasury is saying, which is that the economy is not sort of structured well enough to go through a big economic boom without hitting capacity constraints, and that just is what economists say when they mean sort of a speed limit to the economy, the point at which the economy can't grow any faster without becoming inflationary and interest rates having to go up. So, Australia, because it's kept growing, is very near that at the moment. You're seeing, as I mentioned, higher inflation, and the Reserve Bank there talking about, or people talking about the Reserve Bank of Australia having to put rates up the next move. They've held them for the past few decisions and maybe putting them up much sooner than New Zealand.
You've covered brain drains before. It's kind of like a buzz term, hey, whenever there's a lot of Kiwis going overseas, not even just to Australia, but Europe and like you said, the US as well. Compared to the 2000s peaks, what's different this time, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways it's not necessarily that different. It's always there is always a cycle, and there's a cyclical element to it. It's just I think this one is we've gone from a record high to not quite record lows, because we've been into the negative net migration before, but down to historic lows, below the historic average, very quickly. So for the rest of, for the wider economy to be running with, population gains every year of around 100,000 to suddenly only getting about 10,000 a year, that has a huge impact on, the way that businesses have to gear themselves for an economy. So construction, car sales, retail to some extent, the housing market are underpinned by population growth, or get used to being underpinned by population growth, and quite large population growth traditionally, and suddenly that's not there. That's what the economists will call a headwind. So that's another reason that the downturn in New Zealand may have been a bit worse than expected. It's kind of a chicken and egg, what comes first, because as I say, the bad job market, people leave, but then as they leave, there's fewer people spending money, and that contributes. So you've got to break that cycle. And I think, a lot of that is sentiment and confidence, and how people feel about the country they're living in. So that's the challenge for the government. That's Chris Luxon's mojo line, getting mojo back into New Zealand so people feel better. Young people feel like this country has got opportunity and presents them with a sort of viable future. And maybe we're just starting to see some signs. Certainly there's a bit of a down so long it looks like up vibe to it, because it's not like everybody's suddenly over the moon confident, but people aren't as gloomy as they were, say, 6 months ago in this country, and that's looking promising.
Yeah, from all of the columns you've written and the people that you've spoken to and the conversations that you've had with experts and things like that, do you have kind of, if you were to think about it, what are the first 2 or 3 things that quickly come to mind that you would say to a young person to try and change their mind? Or would you even?
I haven't. Well, I've mentioned my daughter. I haven't tried to change her mind, because I think that is I think it's a great thing on many levels that Kiwis go out to the world, because we can get a bit insular in New Zealand, and and in my case, working and living in London, changed my perspective on the world. You bring back a lot of extra experience and knowledge, and I think that's important for New Zealand. It's just a case of keeping it in balance. I would certainly reiterate to people longer term, in terms of building a life here, that New Zealand is really well placed in the world if we can get a few things structurally fixed up in our economy to be one of the greatest, and I think is one of the greatest places to live in the world still. There are some structural imbalances in the economy that mean that we've been struggling to grow at a decent pace. There'll always be cyclical ups and downs. I mean, we grow grass and produce meat and dairy, and that goes out to the world, and those prices go up and down. New Zealand is sort of buffeted along by the global economy and feels those ups and downs quite strongly, because we're a small open economy. But in terms of lifestyle and opportunity, I think it's still there and will certainly come back. I think there's plenty of potential. You've only got to look at how ratings agencies look at New Zealand, how international commentators and economists, like some of the most upbeat economists about New Zealand I talk to are the Australian economists. They look at us and go, "What are you complaining about?" I mean, that's the vibe I get from them. Yeah.
Thanks for joining us, Liam.
Cheers, Chelsea.
That's it for this episode of The Front Page. You can read more about today's stories and extensive news coverage at nzherald.co.nz. The Front Page is produced by Jane Yee and Richard Martin, who is also our editor. I'm Chelsea Daniels. Subscribe to The Front Page on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts, and tune in tomorrow for another look behind the headlines.